Hello, so I'm going to talk to you today about recycling within ecosystems. And the objectives for today are us to understand how the carbon cycle works and how the nitrogen cycle works. So how these organisms, various different organisms, are involved in the cycling of those particular nutrients. So you might have put leaves and things like that into a compost bin before, maybe potato peelings and things like that, and then a few months later found some soil, and that's because of this process called decomposition. So decomposition then is the breakdown of dead and organic matter, and there are various insects and worms that are involved in that process, so they'll start to break that leaf litter down. But the most important organisms that are part of that process are bacteria and fungi. So they are essential for matter to decompose properly. And once those organisms have been digested, then the nitrogen and the carbon and other nutrients are going to be available for other organisms to be able to take them up. So that involves a really important group of organisms that are called saprotrophs. So saprotrophs live on non-living organic matter, and what they do, these saprotrophs then, is that they secrete enzymes, and that will start to digest that dead waste material, breaking it from big molecules into smaller molecules that are then absorbed by those saprotrophs into their body. And then those molecules are sometimes stored, or they might get used for respiration. So we'll be focusing, particularly when we look at the nitrogen cycle, on the bacteria in particular, looking at the bacterial species that are involved in those processes. But we're going to be starting off with the carbon cycle. So if we start off with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, up here, that carbon dioxide is going to get fixed by plants through the process of photosynthesis. So they're going to be converting it then into molecules that can either be used for respiration or they might get used for growth. Those plants then will get eaten, so they'll get consumed by the primary consumers, and the primary consumers will be eaten by the secondary consumers. Each of those organisms are going to be respiring. So plants respire and all of those animals respire. Now after time, the plants and the animals, they will die and become part of what we call the detritus. And the detritivores, these soil microbes and other organisms, including the saprotrophs that we were talking about, they will then break down that dead decaying matter to produce things that they can use for respiration or growth. And then in the process of cellular respiration, they'll be putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So all of these organisms are going to be respiring. The bacteria, the fungi, they'll be respiring. They can respire aerobically or anaerobically, but either way, they're going to be producing carbon dioxide. Now, the other thing that puts carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is combustion. So the process of burning fossil fuels in particular is also going to be putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So those are the things you need to know about the carbon cycle. We're going to be moving on now to look at the nitrogen cycle. So we need to know a lot more about the nitrogen cycle. I'm going to start off with the processes that are involved in the nitrogen cycle. So we've got various different processes taking place. Starting off with nitrogen fixation. You might have noticed that I've used colour coding here, and that matches up with the colour coding that there is in the textbook as well, so that'll be useful for you. Colour coding is a really powerful way of memorising certain things. So starting off with purple for the nitrogen fixation then. That's conversion of nitrogen gas to a usable form of nitrogen, such as ammonia. So we'll look at the various different ways in which nitrogen fixation can take place. There's another process that's called nitrification. You can see that that is highlighted in red. So nitrification then is oxidation of ammonium to nitrites and nitrites to nitrates. Again, we'll look at those in a little bit more detail in just a moment. We've got ammonification, which is the release of ammonium ions by putrefying bacteria. And denitrification then, whereby these denitrifying bacteria convert nitrates to nitrogen gas. So those are the various processes that are part of the nitrogen cycle. We've got nitrogen fixation, nitrification, ammonification, and denitrification. So I would advise that you get a glossary of key terms and get those definitions written down. So I'm going to start off with nitrogen fixation. We've got 70% nitrogen in our atmosphere, but as nitrogen gas, it's not usable by organisms. So that those organisms then need to fix it so that it's in a usable form, so that they can use it for things like building amino acids to make proteins. And there are certain artificial methods. So some of you doing chemistry will actually learn the whole of the Haber process. We don't need to know the whole Haber process for biology, but we do need to know that that is one of the ways in which nitrogen gas is converted to ammonium ions, nitrites or nitrates to make fertilizers. So that's the artificial methods then that are used for fixing nitrogen. There are lots though of natural methods of nitrogen fixation. For example, lightning. So lightning will convert nitrogen gas to nitrogen oxide, and that nitrogen oxide then will get converted to nitrates. So they'll be putting more nitrates into the soil. Nitrogen fixing bacteria that you find in plants. So leguminous plants have got symbiotic bacteria that we'll look at in just a moment in their root nodules that can fix atmospheric nitrogen. And then there's also nitrogen fixing bacteria, living in soil, so free living in soil that can fix nitrogen. So we've got various different species of bacteria involved in these things. So we start off with the nitrogen fixation in plants. That is done by the Rhizobium species. So Rhizobium is found in these root nodules of plants. So these root nodules are these little bumps and lumps that look a little bit like spots or warts on the plants. Those are the root nodules, really, really important for those plants so that they've got a source of nitrogen. Here we've got an electron microscope image of those Rhizobium species living within a cell of the root nodule. So they're actually inside the cell and they're fixing atmospheric nitrogen. So we've got various processes taking place there. They'll be converting that nitrogen gas into ammonia. And then that will be converted to nitrates over time, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Azotobacteria, then, they're free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So they actually live in the soil and they'll fix nitrogen, and then that nitrogen will be in a usable form for other organisms as well. So the other bacteria that are really important then for the nitrogen cycle are the nitrifying bacteria. So we've got two species of nitrifying bacteria that you need to be aware of. Nitrification involves oxidation, so we need to have a source of oxygen for that process to take place. So first of all, we've got nitrous ammonius, and the nitrous ammonius will convert ammonium ions to nitrites. And then we've got Nitrobacter, and the Nitrobacter will oxidize the nitrites to nitrates. And for the chemists amongst you, I've put some equations in here for you. And then I just like this little diagram here with the different types of bacteria there. So we've got nitrous ammonius then converting the ammonium to nitrites, and then Nitrobacter converting those nitrites to nitrates. Okay, so here we've got the whole process, and I'm going to go through this one step at a time. Again, I'm going to start off with the nitrogen gas in the air. So nitrogen gas in the air then, it can be fixed to a usable form in a variety of different ways. So it could be through that Haber process, so to create fertilizer. It could be by the azotobacteria, that free living bacteria in the soil, which will then put organic nitrogen into the soil. It could be through lightning, creating that nitrogen oxide, or it could be via the rhizobium that are in those leguminous plants that you've got there. So those are the various ways in which we can have nitrogen in the air converted to usable forms. Plants then can get eaten by animals, so that includes the plants, the leguminous plants, but also the other plants that are involved there will get eaten by the animals. And when those animals excrete, they will be producing urea, and the urea will get converted to ammonium, and the ammonium will then get converted by the nitrous ammonius from ammonium to the nitrites, and then the nitrobacter will convert those nitrites to nitrates. So I did highlight the bacteria that are involved in there. We've got the rhizobium bacteria up here that are involved in nitrogen fixation that we get in the root nodules of legumes. We've got the azotobacteria here, or azotobacter, which are free living bacteria in the soil. We've got nitrous ammonius that converts ammonium to nitrites, and nitrobacter that converts the nitrites to nitrates. So the other thing to be aware of is that we can have, if there's too much water moving through an area, so say if you've had deforestation taking place, obviously we thought about deforestation from the point of view of organisms and in terms of habitat destruction, but we haven't really talked much about the leaching of nutrients. So nutrients obviously really important for plants to grow, and if you've got less trees there, then you're going to have more runoff in that area, and the nutrients are going to get leached from that soil. So it's going to decrease the quality of that soil and make it not as good for growing things in. Now, I have sent to you some worksheets for you to fill in. So there is a nitrogen cycle for you to complete, a carbon cycle for you to complete. Use the colour coding. So I've used the colour coding in this PowerPoint, but it's the same colour coding that is in the textbook as well. So use the colour coding to colour in your worksheet, and you can colour code the boxes if you want to. So if you want to colour those in, that's absolutely fine. And have a go as well at the quiz that I put on Teams. Bye.